Most westerns treat violence like choreography. Clean duels, perfect draw times, heroes framed against sunsets. Francis Ford Coppola never bought that version of the frontier. He believed violence should feel sudden, messy, and morally corrosive. These are the westerns, he said, actually got it right. Number 9. The Wild Bunch. If Coppola respected one western for ripping the romance out of gunfire, it was The Wild Bunch. Sam Peckinpah's film doesn't present violence as heroic punctuation, it presents it as a convulsion. The opening robbery explodes into chaos almost immediately. Civilians get caught in crossfire, bullets tear through bodies in brutal slow motion. There is no clean moral framing, no tidy sense of good versus evil, just carnage. Coppola often argued that violence on screen must carry consequences. In The Wild Bunch, every gunshot lingers. The slow motion doesn't beautify death. It forces you to sit inside it. You see bodies twist. You see blood spray against white walls. The rhythm is disorienting. Violence feels invasive, not entertaining. What likely struck Coppola most was the moral erosion. These men are outlaws, aging and aware that their era is ending. They are not noble gunslingers riding into legend. They are professionals clinging to relevance. When violence erupts, it is not about honor. It is about survival and wounded pride. The film's final sequence is where Coppola's admiration makes the most sense. 4 men walk into a Mexican compound knowing they will likely die. The confrontation is not a duel, it is a massacre. Machine guns rip through soldiers, horses scream. Smoke fills the courtyard. There is no triumphant score to elevate the moment. It feels suicidal and inevitable. Coppola believed violence should expose character. In The Wild Bunch, it does. The decision to walk into that compound is less about revenge and more about refusing to rot quietly. It is violent, yes, but also tragic. The West here is not mythic, it is decaying. Another detail that separates this film from conventional westerns is how civilians are affected. Innocent bystanders die in the opening scene. Children play with scorpions and ants, watching destruction for sport. Violence is not isolated between worthy opponents, it spills outward. Coppola understood the moral contamination. He carried similar ideas into his own crime epics. The Wild Bunch does not offer relief. When the dust settles, there is no restoration of order. There is only aftermath. Coppola saw in Peckinpah's approach a refusal to sanitize brutality. That refusal is what makes the film feel disturbingly honest. Violence here is not stylized heroism. It is collapse. Number 8. Unforgiven.
Thank you.
If The Wild Bunch showed violence as convulsive chaos, Unforgiven showed it as rot. Coppola admired westerns that stripped away illusion. Unforgiven does exactly that. Clint Eastwood plays William Money, a retired outlaw pulled back into killing for money. He is not sharp. He is not fast. He is older, slower, haunted. From the beginning, the film dismantles the myth of the clean gunfight. Money struggles to mount his horse. He misses shots. He coughs in the cold. Violence is not graceful. It is awkward and terrifying. Coppola often emphasized that real violence is clumsy. Unforgiven leans into that discomfort. One of the film's most telling scenes involves a young gunman who shoots a man from a distance. The victim does not die instantly. He bleeds slowly, crying for water while his friends listen helplessly. The moment stretches painfully long. There is no glory in it, just consequence. Coppola believed violence should weigh on the people who commit it. Money carries guilt like a physical burden. When he finally steps back into his old persona, it is not triumphant. It is horrifying. The saloon shootout at the end is not a ballet of bullets. It is sudden and savage. Money shoots first. Others scramble. It is over quickly. There is no heroic music to guide the audience's emotions. The scene feels cold. Afterward, there is no sense of restored justice. Money threatens the town, then disappears into darkness. The myth of the noble gunslinger is dismantled completely. What likely resonated most with Coppola is the film's meditation on storytelling. Characters inflate their reputations. Biographers twist events. Legends distort reality. But when violence actually happens, it is small, ugly, and final. That gap between myth and truth mirrors Coppola's own skepticism toward romanticized brutality. Unforgiven understands that violence changes people. It does not redeem them, it corrodes them. Even when money survives, he does not emerge purified. He emerges emptied. Coppola once suggested that screen violence should leave a scar on the narrative. Unforgiven leaves several. It refuses catharsis. It denies the audience a clean moral release. And in doing so, it earns its place among the only westerns that truly got violence right. Number 7. The Searchers. At first glance, The Searchers does not look like a film about getting violence right. It is wide, majestic. Monument Valley stretches across the frame like scripture. John Wayne rides through red dust with mythic gravity. But Coppola didn't admire this film for its landscapes. He admired it for what violence does to Ethan Edwards. Most westerns treat revenge as propulsion. A man is wronged, and violence becomes righteous momentum. In The Searchers, revenge is a sickness. Ethan's pursuit of his kidnapped niece stretches across years. The initial attack on his brother's homestead is not staged as operatic spectacle. It is abrupt and devastating. Smoke rises from a burned cabin. Bodies lie in silence. There is no heroic counterstrike, only aftermath. Coppola often said violence should stain a character permanently. Ethan is stained from the beginning. He is a Confederate veteran, a man already shaped by war. The massacre does not transform him into something new. It reveals what is already fractured. What makes The Searchers disturbingly honest is how long the violence lingers psychologically. The film does not rush toward confrontation. It follows Ethan across seasons and terrain, letting obsession harden him. Each year that passes calcifies his hatred. He does not simply want to rescue his niece. He contemplates killing her, rather than allowing her to live among the Comanche. That moral corrosion is where Coppola found truth. Violence here is not about a single gunshot. It is about ideology taking root. Ethan's racism is not treated as a passing flaw, it is central. His willingness to erase his own blood to preserve his worldview is more chilling than any duel. Coppola believed violence was rarely isolated from prejudice and pride. The Searchers understands that connection. When gunfights occur, they are quick and unsentimental. There are no extended balletic exchanges. Shots ring out, and men fall. Often the camera pulls back rather than pushing in. The landscape dwarfs individual deaths. That distance creates a stark tone. Violence happens, and the earth remains unchanged. Coppola respected that indifference. Nature does not validate human bloodshed. There is also a brutal honesty in how the film treats Native American characters. While still shaped by its era's biases, The Searchers does not present frontier conflict as clean heroism. It shows raids, retaliations, and cycles of brutality. Each act invites another. No side walks away untouched. Coppola often argued that violence should complicate narrative, not simplify it. In The Searchers, every confrontation deepens ambiguity. Ethan saves a child at one moment and threatens to shoot her at another. He protects settlers, but scalps a fallen enemy in rage. He is both guardian and predator. That contradiction is central. The most famous scene in the film is not a shootout. It is the final moment when Ethan lifts his niece into his arms instead of killing her. The violence he has carried for years almost reaches its conclusion. Then something shifts. The act of mercy is quiet, but it lands heavier than any bullet. Coppola admired that restraint. True understanding of violence includes knowing when it nearly happens. The closing shot reinforces the cost. Ethan stands framed in a doorway, then turns and walks back into the wilderness alone. He cannot integrate into the domestic world he has protected. Violence has defined him too completely. He exists outside the threshold of peace. For Coppola, that image likely carried profound weight. He believed cinematic violence should leave characters displaced, altered beyond repair. Ethan is not celebrated as a pure hero. He is left isolated. His years of pursuit have hollowed him out. Even structurally, The Searchers refuses immediate payoff. The search drags on. Leads go cold. Hope fades. Violence is not cathartic release. It is cumulative erosion. Each year spent chasing vengeance robs Ethan of belonging. And when the story ends, there is no parade. No tidy moral resolution. The family is restored, but the avenger remains exiled. Coppola did not admire The Searchers for spectacle. He admired it for acknowledging that violence is not just an event, It is a condition. It shapes identity. It warps love into obsession. It leaves scars that do not fade with victory. In that sense, The Searchers earns its place, not because of how it stages bloodshed, but because of what it understands about the men who carry it. Number 6. McCabe and Mrs. Miller. If most westerns stage violence like a duel at high noon, McCabe and Mrs. Miller stages it like pneumonia, slow, inevitable, cold. Coppola admired films that treated violence as something corrosive rather than theatrical. Robert Altman's McCabe and Mrs. Miller does not build toward a grand showdown under a blazing sun. It builds towards something quieter and far more unsettling. The film follows John McCabe, a gambler who drifts into a small Pacific Northwest mining town and sets up a brothel with the pragmatic Mrs. Miller. At first, it feels almost gentle. Snow falls softly. Business grows. McCabe cultivates a reputation as a gunfighter, though much of it is rumor. The town expands, civilization inches forward, then corporate interests arrive. That's where the violence begins, not with gunfire, but with pressure. A mining company wants to buy McCabe out. He refuses. The refusal doesn't trigger immediate chaos. It triggers inevitability. Hired killers are dispatched. The town keeps functioning, unaware or unwilling to interfere. Coppola often argued that the most truthful violence is procedural. It unfolds because systems demand it, not because a hero needs a climax. McCabe and Mrs. Miller captures that. The threat approaches like weather. There is no operatic buildup, just men riding through snow, businesslike and patient. When the confrontation finally comes, it is anything but glamorous. The climactic gunfight unfolds during a snowstorm. Visibility is poor. Movement is clumsy. McCabe hides behind buildings, slipping and scrambling. There is no dramatic exchange of perfectly timed shots. He fires awkwardly. He reloads slowly. He is terrified. That fear is central. Coppola believes screen violence often fails because it strips away vulnerability. McCabe is not mythic. He is not invincible. He coughs, he hesitates, he bleeds. When he shoots one of the hired men, it is not triumphant. It is desperate. And when he is finally shot himself, it happens without spectacle. He dies alone in the snow. No speech, no swelling music to sanctify the moment. The town continues tending to a church fire, barely aware that its supposed protector lies freezing outside. Violence here is not communal drama. It is isolation. That indifference likely resonated deeply with Coppola. He often explored how institutions continue functioning, even as individuals are destroyed. In McCabe and Mrs. Miller, the corporate machine does not rage. It simply removes obstacles. The film's visual texture reinforces this approach. The snow mutes sound. Gunshots are swallowed by wind. The landscape feels indifferent, almost bored. Violence is small against that backdrop. Coppola admired when filmmakers resisted turning death into spectacle. Altman's restraint forces the audience to lean in. Another reason this film fits Coppola's philosophy is its dismantling of the gunfighter myth. McCabe's reputation precedes him, but it is inflated. He talks big. He negotiates poorly. He tries to avoid confrontation. When violence arrives, he is unprepared emotionally and tactically. Coppola understood that mythology distorts violence. Stories inflate courage and precision. McCabe and Mrs. Miller punctures that illusion. There is no clean duel. There is only survival instinct. Even the structure avoids catharsis. After McCabe dies, the camera does not linger for emotional manipulation. The narrative drifts toward Mrs. Miller in an opium haze. Life continues. Business adapts. The town remains. That continuation is what makes the violence feel authentic. It does not reshape the world into a moral lesson. It simply removes one man from it. Coppola believed violence should expose systems of power. In this film, power is corporate, faceless, efficient. The hired killers are not cackling villains. They are employees fulfilling a contract. Their calm professionalism is more chilling than theatrical cruelty. There is also a melancholy running through the film that separates it from conventional westerns. The frontier here is not bright and expansive. It is damp, gray, uncertain. Progress feels inevitable, but hollow. Violence becomes just another tool of expansion. By staging the final confrontation in snow rather than sunlight, Altman drains it of romantic energy. The cold is constant. The gunfight feels exhausting rather than exhilarating. Coppola admired that tonal honesty. Violence should not feel invigorating. It should feel costly. McCabe and Mrs. Miller earns its place on this list, not because it features the most explosive shootout, but because it refuses to indulge in one. It understands that violence is rarely clean, rarely noble, rarely even witnessed fully. It is messy, it is lonely, it is bureaucratic. And in that bleak honesty, Coppola saw something closer to the truth than most Westerns ever dared to show. Number 5. The Proposition.
Do I need to introduce myself? I know I hear.
If Coppola believed violence should feel like rot spreading through a story, The Proposition understood that instinct perfectly. Set in the Australian outback rather than the American frontier, the film still operates with Western bones. A lawman captures two outlaw brothers and offers a deal: hunt down and kill the eldest brother, or watch the youngest hang. From the beginning, violence is not spectacle, it is leverage. Coppola admired stories where brutality is not decorative, but embedded in the moral structure. In The Proposition, every act of violence carries negotiation. It is transactional. The land is harsh and bleached of romance. Heat presses down on every scene. Flies gather on wounds. Nothing feels polished. The opening gunfight is abrupt and ugly. Shots erupt inside a shack. Blood splatters walls. There is no heroic framing, no slow-motion poetry, just men scrambling and falling. The violence is confusing, immediate, and disorienting. Coppola often argued that violence should not feel choreographed. This sequence feels accidental, almost intrusive. What separates this film from conventional westerns is how it lingers on consequence. A flogging scene unfolds slowly and painfully. The camera does not cut away to spare the audience. Flesh tears. Spectators watch in silence. The brutality is not stylized, it is procedural. The lawman believes he is enforcing order, yet the method exposes cruelty rather than justice. Coppola respected when filmmakers showed that violence contaminates both sides. The outlaws are savage, yes, but the so-called civilizing force is equally capable of horror. There is no clean divide between barbarism and authority. That moral ambiguity aligns closely with Coppola's own storytelling instincts. The landscape plays a crucial role. The Australian desert is unforgiving, almost lunar in its emptiness. Violence feels swallowed by it. Gunshots echo and then disappear into vast silence. Nature offers no validation. There is no swelling score to elevate death into legend. It simply happens, and the dust settles. One of the film's most disturbing elements is its portrayal of inevitability. The deal set at the beginning propels the narrative toward confrontation, but there is no triumphant energy in that trajectory. The brother, tasked with killing, moves with resignation rather than fury. Coppola often emphasized that the most truthful violence comes from pressure rather than passion. When the final confrontation arrives, it is swift and savage. Gunfire tears through bodies, blood spatters white clothing in stark contrast. There is no drawn-out duel. It feels like collapse rather than climax. And afterward, there is no celebration, only exhaustion. The Proposition also avoids romanticizing outlaw culture. Its characters are not charming rogues. They are haunted, feral, shaped by brutality. Violence is part of their environment, not a badge of honor. Coppola admired westerns that dismantled myth rather than reinforcing it. This film does exactly that. By the end, the emotional cost is unmistakable. The lawman's household is not purified by order. It is scarred. The brothers are not redeemed. They are diminished. The frontier remains harsh and indifferent. Coppola saw in The Proposition a refusal to sanitize bloodshed. It does not stage violence as destiny fulfilled. It stages it as corrosion. And that unflinching honesty is precisely why it belongs among the only westerns that truly got violence right. Number 4. The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford.
Am I too late to wish you happy?
If Coppola believed violence should feel like a rupture rather than a reward, this film understood that principle instinctively. The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford does not build toward gunfire as spectacle. It builds toward it like a confession. The film moves slowly, almost hypnotically, observing Jesse James not as a folk hero, but as a man deteriorating under paranoia. Coppola admired westerns that exposed the psychological erosion behind violent men. Jesse here is not a swaggering outlaw carved in legend. He is watchful, suspicious, unpredictable. His silences are heavier than his threats. Violence surrounds him not as glory, but as expectation. When shootings occur in this film, they are abrupt and deeply uncomfortable. There is no triumphant framing, no grand orchestration. A robbery goes wrong, and death arrives quickly, without ceremony. The camera lingers afterward, forcing the audience to absorb the weight, rather than the thrill. What likely resonated most with Coppola is how the film treats reputation as a breeding ground for violence. Robert Ford idolizes Jesse. He studies him. He imitates him. But proximity to myth reveals fragility. The violence here is not explosive. It is intimate and corrosive. The assassination itself is almost painfully restrained. Jesse removes his gun belt. He turns his back. There is no duel, no last-second draw, just a single gunshot that cracks through a quiet room. It is over before the audience can process it. Coppola often argued that the most truthful violence arrives without warning and without flourish. This moment embodies that philosophy. The aftermath is even more disturbing than the act. Robert Ford expects recognition. Instead, he becomes despised. The myth of Jesse James expands while Ford shrinks under public contempt. Violence here does not crown a victor. It traps the perpetrator in shame. Coppola understood that violence in storytelling should reshape identity. In this film, it does so relentlessly. Jesse's legend hardens into folklore. Ford's life unravels into regret. Neither man escapes unchanged. The shot in that quiet house reverberates through years of consequence. The pacing reinforces the film's commitment to emotional realism. Scenes unfold in near silence. Characters sit with suspicion rather than explode into confrontation. When tension peaks, it often dissipates without gunfire, replaced instead by unease. That restraint makes the rare bursts of violence feel invasive rather than exhilarating. Even visually, the film drains violence of romantic color. The cinematography feels muted, almost ghostly. Landscapes appear distant and dreamlike. Gunshots puncture that stillness brutally. Coppola admired filmmakers who understood contrast, serenity shattered by irreversible action. The assassination of Jesse James does not celebrate the outlaw tradition. It dissects it. It suggests that myth is built on blood, and that those who chase notoriety often drown in it. Coppola saw in this film an understanding that violence is not an act of punctuation. It is an unraveling. It fractures trust, distorts memory, and reshapes legacy. And in that quiet, devastating gunshot, it proves that sometimes the most honest violence is the least theatrical. Number 3, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid.
These four rode in here this morning.
If Coppola believed violence should feel like inevitability rather than entertainment, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid fits that philosophy almost perfectly. Sam Peckinpah's later Western is not structured around escalating showdowns. It feels like a long goodbye. From the opening frames, there is a sense that history is closing in. The West is shrinking. The room for outlaws is disappearing. Violence here is less about conquest and more about expiration. Billy the Kid is not framed as a mythic gunslinger riding toward glory. He's loose, reckless, almost boyish at times. Pat Garrett, once his ally, now hunts him under the pressure of landowners and shifting power. Their conflict is not explosive at first. It simmers beneath familiarity and shared memory. Coppola admired westerns that showed violence as personal rupture. In this film, the gunshots do not announce triumph. They punctuate betrayal. When Billy casually kills deputies early on, it happens quickly, almost offhandedly. There is no operatic buildup. The killings feel like reflex, not legend. What makes the violence disturbingly honest is its tone. The film moves at a weary pace. Scenes stretch into silence. Characters stare across rooms before deciding anything. When confrontation finally arrives, it feels like something everyone knew was coming, but hoped to delay. The cinematography reinforces that inevitability. Dust hangs in the air. light filters through broken structures. The landscape feels drained rather than vibrant. Coppola often spoke about how violence should exist within atmosphere, not just action. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid surrounds its gunfights with melancholy. One of the film's most striking elements is how it treats aging. Garrett is not hunting Billy for glory. He is hunting him because the world has changed. The railroad and wealthy cattle interests demand order. The outlaw era must be closed. Violence becomes administrative. That idea likely resonated deeply with Coppola. He understood that systems often replace individuals, and that violence becomes a tool of transition. When Garrett ultimately tracks Billy down, their final exchange is subdued. There is recognition, almost regret, then a shot. Billy collapses without theatrical flourish. There is no dramatic duel under blazing sunlight, just a quiet room and a fatal bullet. Coppola believed violence should not be inflated beyond its reality. This ending honors that restraint. The aftermath is equally telling. Garrett does not emerge victorious in spirit. The act isolates him. The West continues modernizing. The legend of Billy the Kid grows, while Garrett becomes a figure of resentment and fading relevance. Even smaller violent moments in the film carry weight. A minor character is shot in front of his family. The death lingers, not for spectacle, but for grief. Peckinpah allows the audience to sit inside consequence. Coppola respected when filmmakers refused to cut away from emotional fallout. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid does not romanticize the outlaw myth. It shows how violence becomes currency in a changing world. It suggests that killing is rarely about honor. It is about pressure, politics, and survival. Coppola saw in this film a Western that treated gunfire as finality rather than fireworks. Every shot narrows possibility. Every confrontation erases another piece of the past. In that slow, mournful unraveling, it earns its place. Not because it glorifies violence, but because it understands its cost. Number 2, Once Upon a Time in the West. If Coppola believed violence should arrive like a rupture in silence rather than a drumroll toward spectacle, Once Upon a Time in the West embodied that principle with ruthless precision. Sergio Leone opens the film with an extended sequence at a desolate train station. 3 gunmen wait. No music swells, no quick cuts accelerate tension. Just the creak of a windmill, the buzz of a fly, boots shifting in dust. The silence stretches so long it becomes oppressive. Coppola admired filmmakers who understood that violence gains power from patience. When the train finally arrives and gunfire erupts, it feels abrupt, almost invasive, precisely because of the stillness that preceded it. The massacre that follows is not framed as heroic conquest. A father and his children are murdered without ceremony. There is no moral speech explaining their deaths. The camera lingers just long enough to register the horror, then moves on. Coppola often argued that violence should not be decorative. In Leone's hands, it is cold and transactional. Frank, played with chilling calm, is not a flamboyant villain. He is composed, calculating, and entirely comfortable with brutality. His violence is professional, not emotional. Coppola respected that depiction because it strips away melodrama. There is no frenzy in Frank's actions, only execution. What makes this film align with Coppola's philosophy is its refusal to treat gunfights as athletic contests. The climactic duel between Harmonica and Frank is staged with restraint. There is no frantic editing. The men stand facing each other in open space, the past hanging between them. When the shots are fired, it is swift. One falls, the other remains. The act itself is brief, but the history behind it carries weight. Leone understood that violence in Westerns often functions as myth-making. Once Upon a Time in the West interrogates that process. Harmonica's motivation is revealed not as abstract revenge, but as childhood trauma crystallized into purpose. The gunshot at the end does not cleanse him. It fulfills a burden he has carried for years. Coppola believed true cinematic violence should reveal psychological depth, not just advance plot. The film also emphasizes consequence through environment. The frontier here is shifting toward railroads and corporate expansion. Violence is a tool of progress. Landowners are eliminated to clear paths for steel and profit. Coppola often explored how systems manipulate brutality for gain, and Leone captures that dynamic with clarity. Even minor acts of violence ripple outward. A character dies and the land changes hands. A duel ends and a railroad advances. Blood is not isolated, it fuels transformation. That systemic understanding of violence likely resonated with Coppola's own thematic interests. Visually, Leone frames violence against vast landscapes, but he never romanticizes it. Wide shots highlight isolation rather than glory. Close-ups linger on sweat and fear rather than swagger. Coppola admired directors who use scale to diminish ego rather than inflate it. Once Upon a Time in the West earns its place because it understands that violence is not a spectacle to cheer. It is a force that shapes history, scars identity, and clears space for something new, whether that new order is just or not. Coppola saw in Leone's work a rare honesty. Violence here is deliberate, restrained, and irreversible. It does not shimmer, it settles like dust, and that dust never quite lifts. Number 1. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. If there was one Western Coppola pointed to as understanding violence without disguising it as virtue, it was the good, the bad, and the ugly. At first glance, the film feels operatic, wide vistas, Ennio Morricone's unforgettable score, 3 larger-than-life figures circling buried gold during the chaos of the Civil War. But beneath that style lies something harsher. Leone does not present violence as righteous, he presents it as currency. Blondie, Angel Eyes, and Tuco are not moral archetypes. They are opportunists navigating a war-torn landscape. Gunfire in this film is rarely about justice. It is about leverage. Tuco shoots when insulted. Angel Eyes kills because he is paid. Even Blondie, the closest thing to a hero, operates according to survival logic rather than ethical clarity. Coppola admired that moral ambiguity. Violence here is not framed as cleansing the land of evil. It is transactional and often petty. A man is shot mid-sentence. Another dies in a dusty street over a misunderstanding. The randomness feels deliberate. It strips away romantic illusion. The Civil War sequences reinforce that tone. Soldiers die anonymously on muddy fields, while the trio pursues personal gain. Cannon fire echoes in the distance, not as patriotic triumph, but as background noise to greed. Coppola often emphasized that violence should expose human self-interest. Leone weaves that insight into every confrontation. One of the film's most revealing scenes involves Tuco forcing Blondie to walk across the desert without water. The violence is not explosive. It is slow, humiliating, psychological. Coppola believed cruelty could be as damaging as gunfire. That desert sequence demonstrates how power shifts through suffering rather than spectacle. Then there is the final cemetery duel. It is iconic, yes, but not because of rapid shooting. It is iconic because of tension. The camera circles, eyes lock, hands hover near holsters. The anticipation stretches almost unbearably long. When the shots finally ring out, it is over in seconds. Coppola respected that economy. Violence should erupt after silence, not drown it out. Angel Eyes' death is quick. Tuco's survival is accidental. Blondie's dominance feels calculated rather than triumphant. But there is no cheering crowd, just wind moving across graves. The gold is unearthed, but the battlefield remains littered with the dead. Violence achieves objectives, but leaves emptiness behind. Leone also refuses to isolate violence from humor. Tuco's frantic scrambling contrasts with sudden brutality. That tonal instability mirrors reality more than polished heroism does. Coppola often argued that violence coexists with absurdity. The good, the bad, and the ugly understands that duality. Even the framing of gunfights avoids glamour. Leone's extreme close-ups highlight sweat, fear, and twitching eyes. The audience is forced into intimate proximity with killers. The landscape may be vast, but the moment of violence is personal and suffocating. What ultimately places this film at number 1 in Coppola's view is its refusal to moralize. It does not pretend that the good man is pure. It does not suggest that killing resolves moral tension. It acknowledges that in a world shaped by war and greed, survival often requires compromise. Violence here is not redemption. It is negotiation. And that clarity, stripped of romantic varnish, is what Coppola believed the Western needed all along. Violence in great westerns is not about spectacle. It is about consequence, corruption, and character laid bare. These films understood that gunfire should unsettle, not reassure. Coppola admired them because they refused myth in favor of truth. And that truth lingers long after the smoke clears.